had to learn over the years how wrong it was, what I did, and how much pain I caused you. I'm sorry. It hurts me how sensitive it was because he was always such a good friend to me.
Is any tears coming down your face?
Yes, I have tears coming down my face.
Because I haven't seen you wipe your nose or wipe an eye.
An unthinkable tragedy unfolding right now at Southwood Middle School in Miami-Dade.
Is there any particular reason why you did this?
No, there's not.
Do you know what you did is wrong?
Yes, I do.
Are you sorry that this happened today?
No, I'm not.
I feel horrible about what I did. I had to learn over the years how wrong it was.
Mike, what's your birthday?
February 2nd, 1990.
Happy birthday. So you just turned 14?
Yes, I did.
Very good. What were your intentions yesterday?
My intentions yesterday were to kill Andre. I was gonna stab him in the back and stab here, and that would have been it. Me, Andre, Jamie, and myself were in the bathroom.
How old is Andre?
He is 13.
What grade is Andre in?
He is in 8th grade.
Is he a friend of yours?
Yes, he is.
His tone is, detached, factual. When we speak with emotion in our voice, what we're actually doing is expressing how we feel, which is why the voice is so reflective and expressive and modulates. If we don't experience a richness of emotions, then our voice is going to be somewhat flat or somewhat controlled.
I was going to strangle him first, and then after he was dead, I was going to make sure by stabbing him.
Okay, and this was Andre.
This was Andre.
One of the characteristics of psychopathy is that they're manipulative. They have a goal, they have an agenda. They don't share it with you necessarily, but they're constantly monitoring the environment around them to see how, when, and if it provides them an opportunity to go ahead and do what they want to do.
His journal is really interesting. You see him exploring identities of serial killers and mass murderers. He starts to make plans, and then this clear fantasies where he's drawing how he'd like to kill his victims.
At the bottom, he's written, "Will become a serial killer."
Now, did you lure him into the bathroom yesterday?
Into the bathroom, yes, not the stall. I told them both that we were going to be late to class. And so we snuck upstairs after the late bell had rung. We got to the bathroom, and I was trying to convince Andre to go into the stall.
Okay. And how were you going to do that?
I told him that I had something to show him. His response, he didn't want to do it, so he said no. He's like, why can't Jamie go first? My response then was that he's going to go next.
Okay. Now, did Jamie agree? Did Jamie say, I'll come in, I'll look?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And what did you say at that point?
I said no, he's going to go first.
Okay. And any particular reason why?
I wanted to get Andre killed first. I said, are you guys cooperate tomorrow? They're like, yeah, okay, we'll cooperate tomorrow.
All right. And you went off to class?
Yes.
If you're egocentric, then you can manipulate the reality as you want, feed it in the way that you want. He had a plan, and the plan had an order to it. And Andre didn't buy it. Andre didn't trust him. And when the plan didn't go as it worked, he couldn't adjust immediately. The anticipation of the killing probably gave him intense pleasure. He wants to get it right, and getting it right is exciting. The actual planning is very exciting.
What were your intentions today?
I would have talked him into coming to the bathroom with me, coming into the stall. Then I would have proceeded to slit his throat and stab him continuously until he died in the neck area.
Yes.
And then I would have left him there.
Yes.
And gone back downstairs and talked Jamie into coming upstairs, lured him into the other bathroom, and slit his throat and stabbed him in the neck.
Today, who did you meet at the fence?
I met Jamie Coffey.
Why did you try to why did you make the suggestion to Jamie to go inside the school today?
I was planning to murder him.
How long have you had this plan?
A little under a week.
Michael Hernandez is one of those individuals that I think it's easy to find really distressing and disturbing, because we'd all like to imagine that children are good people. And then it's only as they grow up that maybe they adopt antisocial behavior and do harmful and dangerous things. And so in spite of all the evidence that children can be violent, mean to one another, and do horrible things to one another, we really prefer to see children as rather innocent. His case, I think, really highlights the way in which young people, pre-pubertal or going through puberty, can be highly dangerous, highly organized, and be quite psychopathic at that age. And I think what people would prefer not to believe that.
I was going to get him into the stall, the last stall, because it's the biggest, so I'd have more room. I got him into the stall by saying, look, I have something to show you. So I got him into the stall, and I told him to turn around because I wanted it to be a surprise. Before that, I put on the gloves. He saw me put on the gloves, and I said all that.
Oh, you're going to do that.
He might be getting more excited at remembering what he did and reliving the incident. Not all psychopaths want to tell their story. Those are the ones we don't catch. And then there's the sort that have more narcissistic traits, who want witnesses, who want admiration, who want people to see how smart, how violent, how callous, how special they are.
Now, what transpired next?
Okay, I was talking to him, and I told him, all right, now, I have to put my hand over your mouth.
Okay. Once you did that, what happened next?
I took the knife out, and I proceeded to slit his throat.
Did Jamie say or do anything? Did he put up a struggle?
Yes, he did. He turned around after I did that. He asked me not to kill him. So I told him, okay, I'm not going to cooperate.
Okay.
Which was a lie.
Right.
And so I realized that the stall door was open, so I locked it.
We see that lying comes very easy to psychopaths. People who have psychopathy, they do not feel a sense of guilt or shame. That lying is simply in the service of still getting you to do what they want. That's a very slick, automatic response, and he has no intention of not killing him. He has no intention of letting him live, but he figures that'll probably keep him from panicking.
And then I turned him around again and proceeded to stab him.
And where did you stab him, Mike?
I'm not positively sure, but I'm guessing around the jugular vein, right around here. That's
Okay.
what I was aiming for.
Now, after you did that, what happened?
I left, I took my gloves off, and I flushed them down the toilet.
All right. Now, you said you had gone out and you washed your hands.
Yes. I put the knife was broken because of the stab wounds, and I couldn't close it back, so I closed it as much as I could, and I put it in my jacket pocket.
Okay.
I proceeded to go to the sink, and I wiped some of the blood off the jacket, took the jacket off. No, I did not.
He's becoming more animated as he speeds up, and he's talking about it.
He might be getting more excited at remembering what he did and reliving the incident, because that moment is just intoxicating, it's exhilarating. And Hernandez didn't expect to feel that excited or that alive.
And is there any specific reason why you planned this?
No, there's not.
Why did you choose Jamie, your friend?
He was the easiest out of anybody because he would have followed me because we're such good friends. And I knew he would have followed me in there and done what I would have said.
He has no empathy, therefore he has no loyalty, and he has no attachment. So he was simply someone that he felt he could successfully dominate and kill.
Let me ask you this. Is there any particular reason why you did this to Jamie?
No, there's not.
Did he offend you in any way?
No, he did not.
Do you think what you did is right or wrong?
No, I don't.
Well, what don't you think?
I think it is neither right, but I don't think it was wrong.
Do you know what you did is wrong?
Yes, I do.
Are you sorry that this happened today?
No, I'm not.
He believes what he's doing is right, but he knows it's legally wrong. We're all adhering to rules of morality and a moral value to something, and he's saying, yeah, that's not my rule.
In the courtroom today, Michael Hernandez, now 17, the accused killer.
You took his life. Why, Michael? Why? He was your friend, Michael. He was your friend.
The state told jurors the murder was carried out by a 14-year-old who knew right from wrong because he tried hiding the crime.
The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder as charged.
With that verdict, Michael Hernandez sat silent, emotionless, staring straight at a jury that just sent him to prison for life.
I had to learn over years how wrong it was.
What was stupid was you didn't think that I was smart enough to listen to your calls.
You know, what more do you want from me?
For sure. Go, why don't you practice your weekend learning how to cry?
Oh my God. Yeah, man, I may have to stab myself.
Oh my God.
And it hurts me how sensitive it was because he was always such a good friend to me.
Do you have any tears coming down your face?
Yes, I have tears coming down my face.
Because I haven't seen you wipe your nose or wipe an eye.
I think he's feeling annoyed. She's poking at him. She's saying, you're lying. And I think he probably thinks he did a pretty good job of trying to sound sorry. I mean, that is one difficulty that psychopaths really can't appreciate. Since they have no empathy, they often can't appreciate how they're perceived because they're shallow affect. And that's what you'd call his attempt at crying. It's got the form of it, but there's no feeling. I don't think he believes it's wrong, but he's learned how to say it over the years that what he did was wrong.
The facade that you see is not the facade that he is.
So, I think I told you last time that because, you know, I'm supposed to be going up for my resentencing in August. It just seems like such a needless formality that put me through another psychological interview. I've been interviewed by so many psychologists and psychiatrists over the years, it's ridiculous. And, you know, what more do you want from me? My judge, who happens to be a former prosecutor, is totally on the state side, which is really bad. He's a piece of
Well, why don't you practice your weekend learning how to cry?
Oh my God. God, man, I may have to stab myself.
Oh my God.
I try to bring a sharp object to the interview. Do you have something in your hand, Mr. Hernandez? No. Stab. Oh, see, I can cry.
I'm human, I swear. Look at these tears.
When I have life-threatening wounds, I can cry.
Oh, Lordy.
Got a paper clip in there?
Ma'am.
Got a knife?
No, ma'am.
How'd you muster up those tears?
I feel horrible about what I did.
The remorse you show because you think, quote, the judge is a piece of right?
No, ma'am, I don't think that.
You said that, though, right?
I did say it, and it was a horrible, stupid thing to say.
What was stupid was you didn't think that I was smart enough to listen to your calls.
He doesn't even apologize to the judge, which, you know, if I said something really stupid and now I know this person has decision-making capacity, it might say, I really apologize for that. It was disrespectful. People who have psychopathy don't feel that. They do not feel a sense of guilt or shame.
But then I was reading that Ed Gein actually inspired the main character for the movie Psycho, and he inspired the Buffalo Bill character out of Silence of the Lambs. That was a crazy. It was funny because he used to dig up bodies and he was making a skin suit. That's a crazy.
So I think that exchange is really telling that he doesn't get it, and she's joking about it, but he's being serious. That's not the behavior we'd expect to see with someone if they had genuinely changed.
Something I love about your letters, you can tell when you get really excited about something because your handwriting goes down the drain. The other one that I found in there that I was curious about, it says, take right eye. Is that literal or figurative?
Oh, no. That was when I was actually going to start being a serial killer. That was going to be my signature.
Oh, okay.
I was going to take their right eye and carve a cross into their forehead.
Oh, nice.
You want to get credit for your stuff.
He's hoping someone will make a movie about him.
The worst thing that would happen is, like, imagine you're a serial killer and you're killing all these people and someone else gets all the credit. How crappy would that be?
In my profession, we say we're not really sure what remorse is or how you measure it. We all think we know what we're talking about. We say, well, you're sorry for what you did and you won't do it again. But what we realize is that in the courtroom, a jury or a judge is looking for signs of that. In these courtroom situations, they're looking for a sign that would reassure them this individual will be safe to let out. For the psychopaths, most of them can't generate enough feeling to be persuasive. There's a few that can, but it's pretty rare, especially if the crime's been pretty horrific and graphic. And in this case, in the courtroom, when you see him apparently crying, you're not really sure what to make of it. There's no tears, but he's sort of making sobbing sounds. And it doesn't really come across as genuine, even saying,
What type of person you think would do this?
No, I haven't given that much thought. But, I mean, cold.
Well, we were quite scared, to tell you the truth, and this is really, you know, for something like this to happen in a small town like this, you just can't believe it.
3 people are dead from multiple stab wounds, and state police are calling their deaths a homicide.
At this point in time, we haven't determined who it is, so we don't know where they may be headed to.
Jesse just said he was scared. The families don't need to know that.
No, we do. You feel you did the right thing by killing Jeff?
I feel like the world's a better place without Jeff Ryan. Good things could grow where evil was destroyed.
All right, have a seat. You understand you're not under arrest?
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
I mean, I'd be a little bit shocked if I were under arrest, to tell you the truth.
So would I, but...
And I'm here to cooperate.
We're talking about what type of person would do this. Is it cold, greedy, heartless?
Someone just with no love for life. No love for things that grow. And I mean, what we know about Tolkien and Tolkien's writing, it's, you know, his main themes are hope and hopelessness and a love for things that grow. He was very much against the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. Anything that took away from nature, took away from life.
You said your Hobbit is your favorite show?
Book. Bilbo Baggins.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, Bilbo Baggins. Yeah.
By bringing Tolkien into the conversation, he's deflecting in a lot of ways. He's sort of leading them down a path that has nothing to do with why he would be there. I think at the core of the psychopathic personality is the desire to control. You learn to manipulate very well and to not feel guilty, certainly, about manipulating.
You can often get more information from a psychopath if you're willing to be flexible in your interview. In some ways, let them take control and lead the interview, and then weave in and out and try to get more information that way.
Can you think of any good reason for something like this to happen?
Any good reason for something like this to happen? No. I cannot think of any good reason something like that could happen.
The idea that he would shake his head yes, when he's saying no is another tell.
No.
A lot of times during interrogations, people's body language runs contrary to what they're actually saying.
What often, in my experience, makes psychopaths better at lying is the glib and superficial charm that they're able to use as part of that. They come across very likable.
Let's talk about how you met Jeff.
He came over to Barbara Joyce. He came over a couple days after I got there. They introduced me. They said, "Oh yeah, this is Tane." was like, oh, nice to meet you. I shook his hand because I had never met him.
And you guys hit it off? I hit it off?
Yeah, we got along. I asked him if he could find me any work, and I went back up to check and see if he had any work, if he
That
heard
day.
anything. He didn't know of anything. He's mowing the lawn. He stopped mowing the lawn, talked to me, invited me in. Said, have a beer. I come in and I have a beer with him, and he shows me around the house. And that's the only visit, though, that I've made to Jeff.
You said you went there after that very first time you met him.
But really, that was the week later, just to be simple.
Uh-oh. At this point, his story has changed, and it's not uncommon that individuals who are psychopathic are overly confident in their ability to just shift and fool the other person that they're talking to. So he's not very apologetic about changing his story.
Why would you do that? Why would you confuse me like that? I confuse easy.
Because it's irrelevant. Because it's...
Well, it's not really irrelevant because we get 3 people dead. So that's why it makes it very relevant.
I understand.
Especially when people are not telling the truth.
I understand, but I mean, I had nothing to do with it. Here we have kitchen bar. There's your refrigerator where I got the beer. Here's the door to the house. Here's the porch. There's a bathroom. And there's a bedroom.
He's drawing, he's holding the pen. He has let the investigator's letting the defendant be in control, or the suspect here be in control. And he's, in this interrogation, actually, I felt like they did do a really good job overall, sort of taking a one-down position. We know less than you. You educate us about this situation. And I think if you can see Mr. Ormsby he's in an educational stance. He's at the whiteboard, he's got the marker. It's almost as if he's trying to teach the investigator about what went on. And again, from an interviewing perspective, that's a really great way to try to elicit rapport so that the psychopath will even want to talk to you and disclose this information.
Okay, now you're inside the house here, and it was just you and Jeff in that house? Because you said you never met Jason.
I've never met Jason.
Okay, have you ever heard of Jason? Did you go down in here?
No.
How do you know there was a bathroom there? You drew that. You drew that.
Because I asked.
Did you go to the bathroom?
No.
Why not?
I didn't have to go to the bathroom.
Why did you ask where the bathroom was?
In case I needed to go to the bathroom.
Are you kidding me?
Most animals, when they're cornered, attack, counterattack. And depending on how prone to violence they are, they might become violent. They can also resort to what has been referred to as kind of that psychopathic double talk. They're really sort of just wrapping words around sort of an empty vessel, twisting it into a pretzel, and they leave you trying to figure out what it is they're saying.
So this event here, where you were inside, was about a week before this murder happened?
Maybe 2.
Maybe 2 weeks. Never met Jason?
Never met Jason.
Okay. Well, now we have a problem.
Why?
All right. Inside that trailer, there's a ball sitting there, 3 balls. And in that trailer also, we have your DNA and fingerprints on one of the balls.
I think he probably is aware it's going to be very tricky to get out of DNA. And it's possible he's also thinking, yeah, it's okay. They think they got me there, but I'll still find another way to get around this.
See this picture?
Yes.
3 balls, right? This one's yours. One of these is Jason, and one of these is Jeff. But you see my problem. This ball here belongs to Jason, who you never met.
Whom I've never met.
No way in hell that ball sat there for 2 weeks. If anything, it sat there for a couple hours. So we have a problem with that. I need you to explain to me why it is that beer ball is there at the time of the murder.
I think psychopaths tend to be good liars. They certainly don't feel a sense of guilt. And depending on how bright they are, you know, that's when they can mess up.
You were in that house a couple hours before the murder. Just tell me how this all happened. Jane, I want the truth.
Beyond lies at this point, so I'll be willing to tell you everything you want to know. I'm sorry, London. Perhaps I do need a lawyer. This is the first time I've cried.
Yeah. I know. It's a lot to absorb, buddy. It's a lot to process.
I am struck by what appears to be shallow affect, and that's one of the traits of psychopathy. And that's sort of, oh, I know something bad's happening or sad, so I should cry, so I'm gonna cry. There's not a lot of depth to his, apparent sadness here.
Well, obviously, I wasn't planning on getting caught.
Walk me through it.
I'm already guilty. I might as well.
Right.
I think we should start with why.
Okay.
Because of the things he's done to other people. Because of what he is. Was.
So you hated Jeff because he was a drug dealer?
Yeah, I smoke weed, but I don't believe in drugs like that.
Right. Unfortunately, Jason was there.
Fortunately, Jason and Jesse were there. Jesse was in the living room. And he was playing video games.
I have to ask you, because curiosity's killing me. When you got there and you knew that there were two other people there, what made you continue?
Courage. I mean, I went and I said said to myself I was gonna do it. I had it in my mind that I was gonna do it.
Another person might have said, I know where he lives, I've been invited in, I'm gonna hang out, I'll come back another day and revisit this, but he felt compelled to stay and kill 3 people. It is cold and calculated, and there's not even pseudo-emotion. There's no attempt at revulsion at what he did.
What made you continue?
I had it in my mind that I was going to break the molds of society and commit such a thing, and I had picked my targets because they were bad people.
I think it just speaks to his callous lack of regard for humanity. He made up his mind. He had a goal. He was going to take Jeff out, and the rest is just collateral damage. It's too bad they had to be there, is the attitude he seems to portray.
For the psychopath, they typically know basically why they're doing what they're doing, but his explanation is intellectual, and to me, it doesn't hold water, really. It doesn't tie in at all to the amount of rage this guy really has.
Everything was going fine, and I've been talking about spending the winter in the forest, just camping out, building a hut.
Sure.
And he said, oh, I got nails.
He was out there to show you some nails or something. And he bent over to get you the nails. What happened?
Jerry, I killed him.
You killed Jeff. And how did you do that?
With a knife. I knew that I couldn't just leave him there with two people who just saw me.
It is cold and calculated, and there's not even pseudo-emotion. Naturally, he's got to go back in and kill a little boy and the other guy he doesn't even know, so no one can identify him. And that's, you know, that's a real big leap. And often the first kills are big leaps. This is where he seems most psychopathic to me.
I go back in, stab Jason. Jesse ran to the back room. So I chased Jesse, and he was the quickest. He just said he was scared. The families don't need to know that.
No, we do. How many times do you think you stabbed him?
Well, I heard on the news 5, so I'm assuming it's 5.
So then you come out to check on Jason, and he's gone.
And yeah, he's gone. He disappeared.
think,
He was out of my sight. He ran down the road, and I chased him down the road, and that's why he was in the ditch. He didn't understand, because obviously I just met him, and there was no reason to him.
You really only met us the very first time?
It was really the first time I met him.
Yeah.
I think there are moments of candor here. It is possible that they can have moments where they are even appalled by their own behavior. Now, how long or how deep or how that moment of recognition really stands with them, that's the question.
Did you do something else besides stab him?
I cut his throat.
You cut his throat? How many times did you cut his throat?
2, maybe 3 slashes. Obviously, this is premeditated murder, is the term you used for it.
Psychopaths tend to use jargon in whatever situation they're in to exemplify their vast knowledge and intelligence. And I find it's the grandiosity within them that sneaks out and wants to use that language and vernacular in whatever context.
Did you go there planning to kill him?
Yes.
You did?
Okay.
All right. How long before this were you planning this?
Maybe days.
Have you ever killed before?
No.
Do you feel you did the right thing by killing Jeff?
I feel like the world's a better place without Jeff Ryan. You know, best possible outcome. Okay. Honestly. Yeah. That good things could grow where evil was destroyed. You might not see it like that, but it's quite possible that these families will now become closer or stronger where they were. That maybe those children might be better growing up without their father.
Psychopaths are most often not remorseful. I think it makes it a little bit difficult for the majority of us to wrap our mind around how he could engage in those actions and basically show no remorse.
You're going to be charged with 3 counts of murder from the state of Maine. All right.
Could I maybe finish my cut?
The man who called himself a nobody spent years trying to become impossible to ignore. For thousands of miles, the highways of North America stretched beneath endless skies. Truck stops glowed through the darkness like isolated islands. Engines rumbled through cold nights. Neon signs flickered over lonely diners where strangers crossed paths for a few brief moments before disappearing again into the darkness. Most people saw those highways as symbols of freedom. For some women, they became the last roads they would ever travel. Long before police knew his name, before newspapers printed his face, before television crews arrived with cameras and microphones, a predator was already moving through the shadows of America's interstate system. He drove a massive truck across state lines, blending into the endless flow of commercial traffic. He delivered freight by day and carried unimaginable secrets by night. What made him different from many serial killers was not only the violence he inflicted. It was the hunger. A hunger for recognition. A hunger for attention. A hunger so powerful that killing was no longer enough. He wanted an audience. And eventually, he would create one. Years after the murders began, investigators would discover a disturbing pattern. The killer did not simply take lives and disappear. He wanted credit. He wanted the world to know what he had done. He wanted detectives to read his words. He wanted journalists to print his messages. He wanted ordinary people eating breakfast at their kitchen tables to stare at newspaper headlines and wonder who was hiding behind the smiling face drawn at the bottom of a confession letter. A smiling face. 2 dots. A curved line. A childish symbol that somehow became one of the most chilling signatures in American criminal history. The media would eventually give him a name. The Happy Face Killer. But that name came later. Before the headlines, there were victims. Before the nickname, there were families. Before the letters, there were women whose lives mattered far beyond the way they died. And before anyone understood the scale of the nightmare, there was a cold January night in Oregon. The air carried the damp chill of winter. Clouds hung low over the landscape. The Columbia River Gorge stood dark and silent beneath the gray sky. The forests seemed endless. The roads cut through valleys where headlights disappeared around distant bends. Somewhere in that darkness, a young woman named Tonja Bennett was alive. She had dreams. She had memories. She had people who knew her voice and recognized her laugh. She had no way of knowing she was about to become the first known victim in a murder series that would stretch across years and thousands of miles. She had no way of knowing that her death would lead investigators down a path filled with mistakes, false confessions, missed opportunities, and a killer who seemed almost offended when someone else received credit for his crime. Because that is one of the strangest and most disturbing elements of this story. Many murderers desperately avoid attention. Keith Hunter Jesperson actively sought it. Imagine committing a murder and then becoming angry because another person was arrested for it. Imagine reading newspaper stories about an investigation and feeling frustration because your name was not attached to the crime. Imagine watching innocent people face prison while secretly believing that you deserved recognition. That twisted craving for acknowledgement sits at the heart of this case. It transformed a serial killer into something even more dangerous. It transformed him into a storyteller. Not a storyteller interested in truth. A storyteller interested in power. Every letter he sent was designed to place himself at the center of the narrative. Every confession was another attempt to control the conversation. Every smiley face was a reminder that somewhere beyond the reach of police, he was watching. Watching investigators work. Watching reporters speculate. Watching families grieve. And enjoying the fact that nobody knew where he would strike next. As years passed, bodies appeared in different states. Women vanished from roadsides and truck stops. Some were identified quickly. Others remained mysteries for years. Investigators in different jurisdictions struggled to connect crimes scattered across enormous geographic distances. The killer had discovered something terrifyingly effective. Mobility. A truck driver can travel hundreds of miles in a single day. A truck driver can meet strangers in one state and leave evidence in another. A truck driver can disappear into an ocean of commercial vehicles, becoming just another set of headlights moving through the night. For law enforcement agencies in the early 1990s, before modern databases and sophisticated information sharing systems became common, tracking such a predator was extraordinarily difficult. While detectives searched for patterns, the killer kept moving. While families searched for answers, the killer kept driving. While newspapers reported individual murders, nobody yet understood they were chapters in a much larger story. And all the while, the man behind the wheel was developing an identity. Not the identity he showed co-workers. Not the identity he showed friends. Not even the identity he showed family. A secret identity. One built from violence, control, and an insatiable need to feel important. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. By many outward appearances, Keith Hunter Jesperson did not fit the image people often imagine when they think of a serial killer. He was enormous, standing well over 6 feet tall. He worked. He traveled. He interacted with ordinary people every day. Yet somewhere beneath that ordinary exterior existed a darkness that would eventually leave investigators questioning how many victims they had truly found. 8 murders have been officially linked to him. But the number has never fully silenced speculation. Even after his arrest, even after his convictions, uncertainty remained. How many women had crossed his path? How many names had been forgotten? How many families were still waiting for answers? The questions lingered like ghosts along the highways he once traveled. And perhaps the most haunting reality is that many of his victims belonged to society's most vulnerable populations. Women living unstable lives. Women struggling with poverty. Women moving from place to place. Women whose disappearances did not always trigger immediate nationwide attention. Predators often search for vulnerability. Jesperson searched for invisibility. He looked for people he believed the world might overlook. People he believed would be easier to erase. Yet despite all his efforts, despite every attempt to control the narrative, despite every letter and every confession, the story did not become about him alone. Because every serial murder investigation contains 2 battles. The first battle is identifying the killer. The second battle is restoring the humanity of the victims. This story is not merely about a truck driver who became a serial murderer. It is about the women whose lives intersected with his. It is about detectives who chased fragments of evidence across multiple states. It is about families forced to live with unimaginable loss. It is about a justice system that sometimes failed and sometimes persevered. And it is about the unsettling truth that evil does not always announce itself with obvious warning signs. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it writes letters. Sometimes it drives past you on a highway and disappears into the horizon. In the years ahead, investigators would uncover confessions, analyze crime scenes, revisit wrongful convictions, and slowly piece together a map of violence stretching across the American West and beyond. They would discover a killer who viewed murder as both an act of domination and a performance. A killer who wanted attention so desperately that he effectively helped create the legend that would eventually destroy him. But at the beginning of this story, none of that was known. There was only a dark highway. A truck moving through the night. A predator searching for his next victim. And somewhere ahead, waiting beyond the next exit, the next town, the next lonely stretch of road, was the first chapter of a nightmare that would leave scars across multiple states and echo through true crime history for decades to come. This is the story of the Happy Face Killer. And before we reach the letters, the confessions, and the courtroom battles, we must first understand how a young boy from Canada grew into a man capable of unimaginable violence. And how a life that appeared ordinary on the surface concealed the beginnings of a darkness that would eventually follow him down every mile of road he traveled. Long before investigators would connect bodies across state lines, before journalists coined a nickname that would become infamous around the world, before prison walls closed around Keith Hunter Jesperson for the rest of his life, there was a different story unfolding in the Pacific Northwest. It was a story that, on the surface, looked ordinary. Small towns. Working-class families. Endless stretches of rural roads. Children growing up beneath grey skies and mountain horizons. Nothing about those early years suggested that one day the name Keith Jesperson would be spoken alongside some of the most notorious serial killers in North American history. To understand the murders, it is necessary to understand the world that shaped the man behind them. The story begins in 1955. The decade was marked by optimism in much of North America. Families dreamed of stability. Communities expanded. Roads connected cities that once felt isolated. Yet behind countless front doors, private struggles remained hidden from public view. Keith Hunter Jesperson was born on April 6, 1955, in Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada. Chilliwack was surrounded by natural beauty. Mountains framed the horizon. Dense forests stretched into the distance. Rivers carved through the landscape. To visitors, it appeared peaceful. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors and children spent afternoons outdoors. But appearances can be deceptive. Many years later, family members would describe a household marked by tension, fear, and emotional instability. Accounts varied in details, but a common theme emerged. Home was not always a place of comfort. As a child, Keith grew into an unusually large boy. His size made him stand out. By adolescence, he towered over many of his peers. Physical size often brings assumptions. Adults may assume confidence. Other children may assume strength. But inside, the young Keith appeared deeply troubled. He struggled socially. He reportedly felt isolated. He often believed others were laughing at him or rejecting him. Whether those perceptions were entirely accurate mattered less than the fact that he experienced them as real. Isolation has a way of changing people. Some individuals turn inward and develop empathy through loneliness. Others begin nurturing resentment. In later interviews and confessions, Jesperson frequently portrayed himself as misunderstood and mistreated. It is important to recognize that such claims came from a man who would later manipulate facts whenever it suited him. Yet even unreliable narrators often reveal fragments of truth. The picture that emerges is not of a child destined to become a killer. No child is born with a future crime scene attached to their name. Instead, the picture is of a boy whose emotional development unfolded within an environment where anger, humiliation, and cruelty became familiar experiences. One of the most disturbing aspects of Jesperson's early life involved animals. Family members later described incidents in which he tortured and killed small animals. Such behavior does not automatically predict future violence. Many people who harm animals do not become murderers. However, among serial killers, deliberate cruelty toward living creatures appears with unsettling frequency. For investigators who study violent offenders, these acts often represent something deeper than simple childhood misbehavior. They reveal curiosity about suffering, a fascination with power, an experiment in domination, a rehearsal for empathy being switched off. Imagine a quiet rural afternoon. Trees moving gently in the wind. Birds calling from distant branches. Children riding bicycles somewhere beyond sight. Now imagine a young boy discovering that he can control whether another living thing suffers or survives. For most children, witnessing pain creates discomfort. For some, it creates excitement. The distinction matters. Years later, investigators examining Jesperson's life would return repeatedly to these stories because they suggested that something dark had begun developing long before his first human victim entered the picture. As he grew older, another pattern emerged. Anger. Not explosive anger visible to everyone. The quieter kind. The type that accumulates over years. The type that remembers every insult. Every rejection. Every embarrassment. Every perceived slight. People who knew him described someone who often struggled with relationships. He wanted acceptance yet seemed incapable of forming healthy emotional connections. He wanted respect yet frequently felt victimized. He desired intimacy yet often viewed others through the lens of power rather than mutual understanding. These contradictions followed him into adulthood. By the time he reached his late teens and early 20s, The vast geography of North America was changing. Interstate highways connected enormous regions. Commercial trucking became increasingly important to the economy. Goods traveled thousands of miles between cities. Drivers spent days, sometimes weeks, away from home. For many workers, trucking offered freedom. For Jesperson, it offered something else. Anonymity. Movement. Opportunity. As he entered adulthood, he eventually found work as a long-haul truck driver. The profession fit certain aspects of his personality. It allowed him to spend long periods alone. It placed physical distance between him and personal relationships. It provided a lifestyle in which constant travel was normal. The highways became his environment. The truck became his world. Hour after hour, day after day, he drove through forests, deserts, mountains, and cities. He crossed state lines so frequently that geography itself began to lose meaning. One morning could begin in Oregon and end somewhere hundreds of miles away. The faces around him constantly changed. Truck stops became temporary communities. Waitresses served coffee to travelers who would never return. Strangers exchanged brief conversations. People arrived and disappeared. Nobody asked many questions. In retrospect, that world offered exactly the conditions a future serial killer would find useful. But during those years, nobody knew what was coming. To co-workers and acquaintances, Jesperson often appeared unremarkable. That fact is worth pausing on. Many people imagine serial killers as obviously sinister individuals who make everyone around them uncomfortable. Reality is often far more complicated. Some offenders blend into society with alarming effectiveness. They learn how to appear normal. They understand social expectations well enough to imitate them. The monster exists beneath the surface. Invisible. Patient. Waiting. By the 1980s, Jesperson had married and started a family. To outside observers, parts of his life appeared stable. He had children. He had employment. He participated in everyday routines shared by countless other adults. Yet beneath that appearance, fractures continued widening. Relationships became strained. Conflicts increased. Personal dissatisfaction grew. Many violent offenders spend years building internal narratives that justify future actions. They begin seeing themselves as victims regardless of evidence. Responsibility shifts outward. Every problem becomes someone else's fault. The world owes them something. People have wronged them. Society has failed them. Such thinking does not create a murderer on its own. But it creates fertile ground for rationalization. The ability to excuse cruelty. The ability to transform another human being into an object. The ability to convince oneself that consequences apply only to other people. As the years passed, Jesperson's marriage deteriorated. The separation left him increasingly isolated. He spent longer periods on the road. The distance between his public identity and private thoughts continued growing. And then there was the geography itself. To understand this case, one must appreciate the scale of the territory involved. The western United States contains enormous stretches of land. Forests cover mountainsides. Highways cross deserts. Small towns sit hundreds of miles apart. Travelers can drive for hours without seeing major population centers. For a predator willing to move constantly, such landscapes create unique advantages. Victims may disappear far from where they were last seen. Bodies may be discovered far from where crimes occurred. Evidence becomes scattered across jurisdictions. Investigators face enormous logistical challenges. In the years before advanced digital databases became widespread, those challenges were even greater. A murder in one state might not immediately appear connected to a similar crime elsewhere. Patterns remained hidden. Predators exploited those gaps. And while law enforcement agencies worked within the limitations of the era, Keith Jesperson was learning something dangerous. He was learning how invisible he could become. The roads taught him that people often forget faces quickly. The truck stops taught him that strangers rarely ask questions. The constant movement taught him that distance itself can become a weapon. Most people driving those highways saw freedom. He saw opportunity. What makes this realization particularly chilling is that the transformation was gradual. There was no single dramatic moment when Keith Jesperson suddenly became the man history would remember. Instead, the change resembled a slow gathering storm. Clouds accumulating beyond the horizon. Darkness spreading almost unnoticed. Pressure building until eventually something breaks. By the end of the 1980s, that breaking point was approaching. The frustrations that had simmered for years were no longer confined to private thoughts. The fantasies of domination that may have begun with helpless animals were evolving into something far more dangerous. The resentment he carried toward women, toward authority, toward a world he believed had denied him recognition, was becoming increasingly intertwined with his need for control. Control would become a central theme in everything that followed. Control over victims. Control over investigations. Control over public attention. Control over the narrative itself. Because unlike many serial killers, Jesperson would eventually reveal an extraordinary contradiction. He wanted to remain hidden. But he also wanted to be known. He wanted to avoid capture. But he wanted recognition. He wanted power over life and death. And he wanted people to admire him for it. Those conflicting desires would eventually shape every stage of the case. They would influence the murders. They would influence the confessions. They would influence the letters that made him infamous. And ultimately, they would help bring about his downfall. But in the years before the first known murder, none of those outcomes were visible. There was only a truck driver traveling endless highways. A man carrying resentments nobody could fully see. A man whose outward appearance concealed a growing capacity for violence. A man moving through ordinary American landscapes while extraordinary darkness gathered inside him. The roads stretched ahead. The future victims had not yet met him. The investigations had not yet begun. The newspapers had not yet printed the smiling face. But somewhere beneath the routine rhythms of daily life, the foundation of one of the most disturbing serial murder cases of the 1990s was already being built, mile after mile, grievance after grievance, fantasy after fantasy. As Keith Hunter Jesperson drove deeper into a future that would leave devastation scattered across thousands of miles of highway. When people hear the name Happy Face Killer, attention naturally gravitates toward the man who committed the crimes. His letters. His confessions. His disturbing desire for notoriety. But focusing solely on the killer creates a dangerous distortion. It risks turning real human beings into footnotes in their own story. The truth is that this case did not begin with a serial killer. It began with lives. Lives that existed long before they crossed paths with Keith Hunter Jesperson. Lives filled with hopes, disappointments, friendships, family memories, private struggles, and dreams that would never have the chance to become reality. To understand the true weight of this case, we must first step away from the killer and spend time with the people whose futures were stolen. The first known victim was a young woman named Tonja Bennett. In many ways, Tonja represents one of the greatest tragedies of the entire case. Not simply because she was murdered, but because for years the truth about what happened to her remained buried beneath confusion, false confessions, and investigative mistakes. Before she became a headline, before detectives examined evidence and reporters wrote articles, she was simply a young woman trying to navigate life. Like many people in their early 20s, her journey was not perfectly linear. She experienced challenges and uncertainties. She made choices. She searched for opportunities. She lived in a world that often judges people by their circumstances rather than their humanity. Yet those who knew her did not define her by hardship. They remembered a person. A daughter. A friend. Someone who laughed. Someone who mattered. The winter of 1990 settled heavily across Oregon. Gray clouds frequently covered the sky. Rain swept across highways. Cold air drifted through forests and river valleys. Life continued at its normal pace while unseen dangers moved quietly beneath the surface. Somewhere within that ordinary winter landscape, Tonja was living the final chapter of her life without realizing it. There is something heartbreaking about that reality. Every victim wakes up on their last morning without knowing it will be their last. They make plans. They think about tomorrow. They carry expectations into the future. The future simply never arrives. For Tonja Bennett, January 1990 would become that dividing line between life and tragedy. Yet she was not alone. As investigators would eventually discover, other women were also crossing paths with circumstances that placed them at extraordinary risk. One of the recurring patterns in the Happy Face Killer case involved vulnerability. Not weakness. Vulnerability. The distinction matters. Many of Jesperson's victims lived lives that required resilience most people never have to develop. Some struggled financially. Some experienced unstable housing situations. Some spent time moving from place to place. Some relied on strangers for transportation. Some worked in environments where danger was an accepted part of daily survival. They were not weak. They were surviving. Unfortunately, predators often view survival struggles as opportunities. A woman standing alone near a truck stop. A traveler needing a ride. A person with limited support systems. To most people, these individuals are simply fellow human beings. To a predator, they become targets. That reality would repeat itself throughout Jesperson's killing spree. The victims came from different places and different backgrounds, but many shared a common trait. They occupied spaces society often overlooks. And when society overlooks people, predators feel emboldened. Years after Tonja Bennett's murder, investigators connected additional victims to Jesperson's crimes. One of them was Cynthia Lynn Rose. Like every victim in this story, Cynthia's life contained far more than the circumstances surrounding her death. She existed as a complete person with experiences, relationships, fears, and aspirations. Yet when investigators attempted to reconstruct her final days, they encountered a challenge that would become familiar throughout the case. Fragments. Bits of information. Scattered memories. Witness accounts fading with time. The transient nature of some victims' lives made investigations extraordinarily difficult. People who move frequently leave fewer records. People living on society's margins are often less visible to institutions. Their disappearances may not immediately trigger large-scale searches. For families, that reality creates a second tragedy. First comes the loss. Then comes the fear that the world may not care enough to seek answers. Another victim was Laurie Ann Pentland. By the time investigators learned her name, she could no longer tell her own story. That burden fell to detectives, forensic specialists, journalists, and surviving loved ones. Every photograph became important. Every memory mattered. Every detail transformed into a piece of a larger effort to reclaim her identity from the shadow cast by the killer. Imagine looking through an old family photo album. A birthday celebration. A holiday gathering. A smile captured decades earlier. Nobody in those images knows what lies ahead. Nobody suspects that one day detectives will study those photographs while investigating a homicide. Nobody imagines that the person smiling into the camera will become known to strangers primarily through a criminal case. Yet that is the cruel reality many families faced. The murders did not simply end lives. They altered the lives of everyone left behind. Parents spent years wondering whether they could have done something differently. Siblings replayed old conversations in their minds. Friends remembered unfinished plans. The absence remained. Permanent. Invisible. Heavy. Another victim linked to Jesperson was Patricia Skipple. Like the others, she entered the killer's orbit during a period when he was moving across vast stretches of territory. Truck routes carried him through multiple states. Highways became hunting grounds. Encounters that appeared ordinary on the surface concealed deadly intentions underneath. One of the most frightening aspects of serial murder cases is their randomness. Victims do not know they are participating in a life-or-death decision. They believe they are accepting a ride. Starting a conversation. Meeting a stranger. Continuing an ordinary day. The killer knows something they do not. The killer understands the danger present in the moment. The victim does not. That imbalance creates a terrifying form of power. Jesper Sun repeatedly exploited it. Perhaps one of the most haunting victims in the case was Angela May Surprise. Her murder would later stand out even among a series of brutal crimes because of the cruelty described in Jesperson's own confessions. Angela's life, like the lives of the other victims, extended far beyond the violence inflicted upon her. Yet discussions of her case inevitably return to the horrifying details because they reveal something important about the killer's psychological evolution. Violence was no longer merely a means to an end. It had become an expression of domination. A demonstration of power. A way for the killer to reinforce his sense of control. For investigators studying serial offenders, escalation often becomes a critical indicator. Over time, some offenders become increasingly confident. They take greater risks. Their behavior grows more extreme. The gap between fantasy and action narrows. By the time Angela crossed paths with Jesperson, that process appears to have been well underway. Then there was another victim whose identity remained uncertain for years. A woman Jesperson referred to as Claudia. Even today, unidentified victims remain among the most heartbreaking elements of many serial murder investigations. A name carries enormous power. A name connects a person to family, history, and memory. Without a name, someone risks becoming a mystery instead of a human being. Imagine a mother somewhere wondering what happened to her daughter. Imagine siblings searching decades later for answers. Imagine a family never receiving confirmation because the victim remains unidentified. For them, grief becomes suspended. The story never truly ends. Cases involving unidentified victims remind us that some wounds remain open long after court proceedings conclude. The final officially confirmed victim in the series was Suzanne Kjellenberg. By this point, the pattern of violence had stretched across years. Multiple states. Multiple crime scenes. Multiple shattered families. Each victim represented a separate tragedy. Together, they formed a devastating portrait of predation hidden beneath the ordinary rhythms of interstate travel. What unites all these stories is not merely the identity of the killer. It is the humanity of the victims. Modern true crime often struggles with this balance. Sensational details attract attention. Killers become infamous. Nicknames spread through documentaries and headlines. Meanwhile, victims risk becoming secondary characters. This case serves as a reminder that every homicide investigation begins with a person who deserved more time. More birthdays. More opportunities. More ordinary moments. More chances to grow older. Tonja Bennett should have had a future. Cynthia Rose should have had a future. Laurie Pentland should have had a future. Patricia Skipple should have had a future. Angela Surprise should have had a future. Suzanne Kjellenberg should have had a future. And the unidentified victims whose names may never be fully known should have had futures as well. Instead, those futures ended when they encountered a man who viewed human beings as objects existing for his gratification, his anger, and eventually his desire for attention. The tragedy extends beyond the deaths themselves. Families were forced to endure investigations that sometimes lasted years. Questions lingered. Leads vanished. Hope rose and collapsed repeatedly. Some relatives spent birthdays and holidays staring at empty chairs. Some carried unanswered questions for decades. Every murder creates a ripple effect. The victim is at the center. But the pain travels outward. Parents. Children. Brothers. Sisters. Friends. Communities. The damage expands far beyond a single crime scene. As investigators slowly began piecing together the scope of Jesperson's violence, they came to understand that they were not dealing with isolated incidents. They were uncovering a pattern. A series. A network of connected tragedies stretching across enormous distances. The women involved had never met one another. Many came from different backgrounds. Different states. Different circumstances. Yet they became connected through one horrifying fact. They encountered the same predator. A predator who viewed their lives as disposable. A predator who believed he could move endlessly from one highway to the next without consequence. A predator who assumed the world would remember him while forgetting them. History, however, has a responsibility. The responsibility to remember the victims first. Because before there were letters signed with smiling faces, before there were confessions and courtroom proceedings, before television specials and books examined the psychology of a serial killer, there were real women living real lives. And as this story moves toward the night when the first known murder occurred, it is worth remembering that every name in this case once belonged to someone making plans for tomorrow, unaware that tomorrow was about to be stolen forever. January 21, 1990, began as an ordinary winter day in Oregon. Nothing about the weather hinted that it would become one of the most significant dates in the history of the Happy Face Killer case. The sky hung low with thick gray clouds. Cold air drifted across roads darkened by recent rain. Cars moved through Portland and its surrounding communities as people followed familiar routines. Workers ended shifts. Restaurants served dinner. Neon signs illuminated parking lots. Radios played inside passing vehicles. Life moved forward exactly as it had the day before. And yet, somewhere within that ordinary evening, two paths were quietly moving toward one another. One belonged to a young woman named Tonja Bennett. The other belonged to Keith Hunter Jesperson. By the time the night was over, one of them would be dead. The details of Tonja Bennett's final hours have been reconstructed through investigative records, witness statements, and Jesperson's later confessions. Like many homicide cases, not every minute can be known with certainty. Some moments disappeared forever with the victim herself. But enough pieces remain to reveal the outline of a horrifying encounter. That evening, Tonja entered a local bar near Portland. The atmosphere inside was typical for a winter night. Conversations blended together beneath dim lighting. Glasses clinked against wooden surfaces. Cigarette smoke lingered in the air, a common sight in bars of that era. People laughed, flirted, argued, and shared stories. For most customers, it was simply another night out. For Tonja, it would become her last. At some point during the evening, she encountered Keith Jesperson. To observers, nothing about the interaction necessarily appeared alarming. This is one of the unsettling realities of predatory violence. The most dangerous moments often begin with ordinary conversations. A smile. A greeting. A casual exchange. The predator does not initially appear as a predator. He appears as another person. Jesperson was physically imposing. Standing well over 6 feet tall and weighing hundreds of pounds, he was difficult to overlook. Yet he also understood how to appear approachable when necessary. He knew how to engage strangers. He knew how to create a sense of normalcy. For predators, that ability is often a weapon. Trust becomes the doorway through which danger enters. As the evening progressed, Tonja eventually agreed to leave with him. At that moment, she had no way of knowing the decision would cost her life. She was not entering a crime scene. She was stepping into what she believed was a routine social interaction. The future still existed in front of her. Tomorrow still seemed real. The next morning still felt guaranteed. Those assumptions, shared by every person who has ever lived, would soon be shattered. Jesperson brought her to the residence he was renting at the time. Outside, the night remained cold and quiet. The surrounding area was wrapped in darkness. Streetlights cast pale pools of illumination onto wet pavement. Most residents slept unaware that a deadly confrontation was unfolding nearby. Inside the residence, something changed. The exact trigger may never be fully understood. Many killers later invent explanations for their actions. They blame arguments. They blame insults. They blame victims. They create stories designed to justify the unjustifiable. The reality is often simpler. The violence originates within the offender. According to Jesperson's later confessions, an argument developed between them. What began as a social encounter rapidly transformed into an act of brutality. The atmosphere inside the residence shifted from ordinary to terrifying. The woman who had entered expecting conversation and companionship suddenly found herself trapped with a man whose need for control was stronger than his humanity. Violence erupted. The attack was not impulsive in the sense many people imagine. Even if the specific confrontation occurred suddenly, the underlying capacity for violence had been developing inside Jesperson for years. Every unresolved rage, every fantasy of domination, every resentment, every rehearsal of cruelty, all of it converged in that moment. Tonja fought for her life. Victims almost always do. Popular culture sometimes portrays murder as quick and silent. Reality is different. Human beings possess an extraordinary instinct to survive. They struggle. They resist. They search desperately for escape. The final moments of many homicide victims involve unimaginable fear and determination. Tonja was no exception. But physical size matters. Strength matters. Control matters. Jesperson possessed overwhelming advantages. The assault became increasingly violent. He beat her. He sexually assaulted her. Then he strangled her. Strangulation is among the most personal forms of murder. Unlike a distant act of violence, it requires prolonged physical control over another human being. The killer remains present throughout the process. He feels resistance. He witnesses fear. He experiences the gradual extinguishing of life. For investigators who study violent offenders, strangulation often reveals a profound desire for domination. The victim's death is not merely the outcome. The control itself becomes part of the offender's objective. As life left Tonja Bennett's body, something significant happened inside Keith Jesperson. A boundary disappeared. Many future serial killers describe their first murder as a transformative event. Not because they experience remorse. Because they discover they can do it. The fantasy becomes reality. The imagined act becomes a memory. The psychological barrier separating thought from action collapses. Once crossed, that barrier can be difficult to rebuild. The first murder is often the most important. It teaches the offender something. In Jesperson's case, it appears to have taught him that he could kill and survive the experience. He could commit an atrocity and continue living as though nothing had happened. For some individuals, that realization becomes intoxicating. The attack was over. Tonja Bennett was dead. But the crime itself was not finished. Murder creates a second challenge for offenders. The body. What happens next often reveals as much about a killer as the murder itself. Some panic. Some flee. Some attempt elaborate concealment. Others behave with chilling calmness. Jesperson belonged to the latter category. After the killing, he transported the body away from the residence. The darkness of the Oregon night provided cover. Roads stretched through sparsely populated areas. The Columbia River Gorge region offered countless isolated locations where someone could disappear from public view. To most people, the gorge is breathtaking. Towering cliffs. Dense forests. Powerful rivers. Scenic vistas. To investigators, it would soon become something else. A crime scene. The contrast is disturbing. Nature remained beautiful. Human behavior did not. Somewhere within that landscape, Jesperson abandoned Tonja's body. Then he drove away. The act itself was horrifying. What followed may be even more chilling. He returned to ordinary life. He went back to work. He continued his routines. He interacted with people who had no idea what he had done. This dual existence is one of the most unsettling features of serial offenders. The ability to compartmentalize. To murder one day and hold casual conversations the next. To carry secrets invisible to everyone around them. 4 days, the truth remained hidden. Friends and family members who knew Tonja did not immediately understand what had happened. People searched for explanations. Hope persisted. Perhaps she would return. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Perhaps there was another reason for her absence. Hope often survives longer than logic. Families cling to possibilities because the alternative is unbearable. Meanwhile, Jesper's son watched events unfold from a distance. No police officers arrived to arrest him. No dramatic confrontation occurred. No witness stepped forward. The world continued turning. For the killer, that silence was meaningful. Every hour that passed reinforced a dangerous belief. He had gotten away with it. That belief would shape everything that followed. Because the first successful murder did not satisfy him. It empowered him. The crime accomplished several things simultaneously. It provided control. It released accumulated rage. It confirmed his ability to dominate another person. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated weaknesses within the investigative system. The body had been discarded. The killer remained unidentified. Life continued. From Jesperson's perspective, those facts were proof of success. Yet hidden beneath that apparent success was a seed that would later grow into obsession. Recognition. At first, survival was enough. Soon, survival would no longer satisfy him. The world did not know who had committed the crime. Police did not know. Journalists did not know. The public did not know. For many killers, anonymity is the goal. For Jesperson, anonymity would eventually become a source of frustration. But that development was still in the future. On the night of January 21, 1990, he was simply a murderer who believed he had escaped accountability. The highways remained open. The truck routes stretched endlessly ahead. The authorities had not connected his name to the crime. And somewhere within his mind, a dangerous lesson was taking root. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The man who entered that night was not the same man who left it. A young woman was dead. A family was about to receive devastating news. An investigation was about to begin. And a serial killer had just committed the first known murder in a spree that would ultimately stretch across years, multiple states, and countless miles of American highway. The nightmare had begun. Neither investigators nor the public understood it yet. But the first chapter had been written in blood, and the man responsible was already driving toward a future filled with more victims, more violence, and a growing belief that he was smarter than everyone trying to stop him. In every homicide investigation, there is a moment when tragedy transitions into mystery. A life has already been taken. The violence has already occurred. The victim can no longer speak. What remains are fragments. A location. A body. Physical evidence. Witness memories. Tiny pieces of a puzzle scattered across time and space. For investigators, everything begins there. For the family, everything changes there. For the killer, everything depends on what happens next. In the case of Tonja Bennett, the first known victim of Keith Hunter Jesperson, that moment arrived in the cold days following her disappearance. The Columbia River Gorge region stretched across the landscape with its familiar mixture of beauty and isolation. Steep cliffs overlooked winding roads. Dense forests covered hillsides. Winter clouds hung low across the horizon. Moisture lingered in the air. The scenery was breathtaking to tourists and locals alike. But nature has an unsettling ability to conceal human cruelty. A place that appears peaceful can suddenly become the setting for unimaginable violence. When Tonja's body was discovered, the atmosphere surrounding the case changed instantly. A missing person investigation became a homicide investigation. Questions multiplied. Who was she with? Where had she been? Who wanted her dead? What happened during her final hours? Detectives arriving at a murder scene often experience a peculiar contradiction. Emotionally, they understand the horror of what they are seeing. Professionally, they must suppress those emotions long enough to focus on evidence. Every detail matters. The position of the body, nearby objects, weather conditions, possible tire tracks, fibers, footprints, signs of movement. Anything overlooked in the early stages may never be recovered later. The challenge facing investigators in 1990 was particularly difficult because outdoor crime scenes are constantly changing. Rain erases evidence. Wind shifts debris. Animals disturb remains. Time works against investigators from the very beginning. As officers secured the area and forensic teams began their work, the first picture of the crime slowly emerged. The victim had clearly died violently. The scene suggested homicide rather than accident. Yet identifying a killer requires more than recognizing murder. A detective must transform uncertainty into evidence. And at this stage, uncertainty was everywhere. Some clues pointed in one direction. Others pointed nowhere at all. The victim's final movements remained largely unknown. Potential witnesses were limited. The killer was already gone. Meanwhile, somewhere else in Oregon, Keith Jesperson continued living his life. That fact is one of the most chilling aspects of many murder investigations. While police process crime scenes, killers often watch events unfold from a distance. They read newspaper articles. They observe media coverage. They listen to rumors. Sometimes they even insert themselves into investigations. The public imagines murder as a single event. In reality, a second battle begins immediately afterward. The race between investigators seeking answers and offenders seeking escape. At first, the investigation into Tonja Bennett's death followed a familiar path. Detectives examined relationships. They explored recent contacts. They searched for individuals connected to the victim. This process is logical because, statistically, many murders involve someone known to the victim. Family members, partners, friends, acquaintances. The assumption often provides useful leads. But assumptions can also create blind spots. In this case, the actual killer existed outside the victim's immediate circle. That reality made the investigation far more difficult. The person responsible had entered her life briefly and then vanished. No obvious connection linked him to her daily world. No long history existed between them. No pattern immediately drew attention toward him. The killer had effectively entered and exited the victim's life within a matter of hours. Investigators were searching for someone hidden behind layers of coincidence and distance. And then the case took a dramatic turn. A turn that would eventually become one of the most controversial aspects of the entire investigation. As detectives pursued leads, a woman named Loven Pavlinac entered the picture. What followed would become a cautionary tale studied by criminal justice experts for years. Pavlinac approached authorities with information about the murder. Initially, that may not sound unusual. Witnesses frequently come forward during investigations. New information often arrives from unexpected sources. But the situation quickly became more complicated. Pavlinac implicated both herself and her boyfriend, John Sosnowski, in the murder of Tonja Bennett. For detectives desperate to solve a homicide, such a confession appeared extraordinarily significant. Confessions carry immense weight. When someone voluntarily admits involvement in a crime, investigators naturally pay attention. Yet confessions are not always reliable. History contains numerous examples of individuals admitting to crimes they did not commit. Some seek attention. Some suffer from psychological problems. Some act out of fear. Some hope to manipulate circumstances. And some become trapped in increasingly elaborate lies. At the time, however, detectives believed they were moving closer to solving the case. The confession seemed to fit. Details emerged. Statements were collected. The investigation increasingly focused on Pavlinac and Sosnowski. As momentum built, the case against them strengthened. Eventually, both were convicted. From the outside, it appeared the mystery had been solved. The victim had been identified. The suspects had been arrested. The courts had delivered justice. The public moved on. New crimes occupied headlines. New investigations demanded attention. For many people, the story seemed complete. But it was not. Not even close. Because the actual killer remained free. Keith Jesperson watched everything happen. He watched innocent people take responsibility for a murder he had committed. He watched investigators celebrate progress. He watched the justice system move forward. And what happened next revealed something deeply disturbing about his psychology. He became angry. Not because innocent people faced punishment. Not because justice had failed. Not because he felt guilt. He became angry because somebody else was receiving credit. The reaction offers a rare and revealing glimpse into the motivations driving him. Most killers desperately want anonymity. Jesper Sun wanted recognition. The murder itself had not provided enough satisfaction. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted ownership. He wanted people to know what he had done. Imagine the mindset required to feel jealousy over a homicide. Imagine seeing your crime attributed to someone else and feeling offended rather than relieved. That twisted craving would eventually transform the investigation. But at this stage, authorities remained unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. They believed the case was closed. Meanwhile, the real killer was becoming increasingly frustrated. As months passed, that frustration evolved into action. According to later accounts, Jesper Sun began leaving anonymous messages and confessions. One of the earliest appeared on a restroom wall. The message contained information about the murder. Information that should have been known only to investigators and the killer. Most notably, it included a symbol that would later become infamous. A simple smiling face. 2 dots. A curved line. Childlike. Harmless in appearance. Sinister in context. The symbol reflected something important. Jesper Sun wanted a signature. A mark. A way to connect himself to the crime without fully revealing his identity. The act was not merely communication. It was performance. He was creating a character. A persona. The foundations of the happy face killer identity were beginning to emerge. At first, authorities did not immediately grasp the significance. Anonymous messages appear in many investigations. Not all prove credible. Distinguishing genuine information from false claims can be difficult. But the messages continued. The pattern grew stronger. The content became harder to dismiss. Eventually, investigators began recognizing a troubling possibility. What if they had arrested the wrong people? For law enforcement, few realizations are more devastating. Every detective wants justice. Every investigator hopes to identify the correct offender. Discovering that innocent individuals may have been convicted forces authorities to confront painful questions. Were warning signs missed? Were assumptions accepted too easily? Did the confession overshadow contradictory evidence? The deeper investigators looked, the more troubling the answers became. Gradually, cracks appeared in the original case. The confidence that once surrounded the convictions weakened. Evidence was re-examined. Statements were scrutinized. Alternative explanations gained credibility. And hovering over everything were the increasingly detailed claims coming from the true killer. Jesper Sun understood something critical. Only the murderer knew certain facts. If he revealed enough information, eventually investigators would have to listen. The strategy worked. Slowly. Painfully. But it worked. As authorities reassessed the case, the horrifying truth emerged. Lovan Pavlanak and John Sosnovsky had not murdered Tonja Bennett. The real killer had been free the entire time. For the victim's family, the revelation was devastating. The original conviction had offered closure. Now that closure disappeared. The investigation effectively reopened. The search began again. And somewhere out on America's highways, Keith Jesper Sun continued driving. The discovery transformed the case from a tragic homicide into something even larger. A murder investigation complicated by wrongful convictions. A killer obsessed with recognition. A growing collection of confessions. And a disturbing possibility that would soon demand attention. What if Tonja Bennett had not been the only victim? At the time, no one fully understood the answer. The pieces existed, but they remained scattered. A murder in Oregon. A truck driver traveling enormous distances. Anonymous confessions. A smiling face drawn beneath chilling words. Individually, the clues seemed disconnected. Together, they pointed toward something far more dangerous. Investigators had spent months searching for a single killer. What they were actually approaching was the edge of a serial murder investigation. And while detectives struggled to untangle mistakes from evidence, Keith Jesperson was learning an even more dangerous lesson than the one he learned after the murder itself. He had discovered the power of controlling a story. He could manipulate investigators. He could influence media coverage. He could insert himself into an investigation without revealing his identity. The attention he craved was beginning to arrive. And once he tasted that attention, he would want more. Far more. The body discovered near the Columbia River Gorge had exposed a murder. The investigation had uncovered a terrible mistake. But neither investigators nor the public yet realized that the smiling face appearing beside anonymous confessions was not merely the signature of a killer. It was the opening announcement of a predator who intended to keep killing. By the early 1990s, investigators believed they had solved the murder of Tonja Bennett. The case appeared closed. Suspects had confessed. Convictions had been secured. Officially, justice had been served. But beneath that appearance of certainty, the truth remained buried. The actual killer was still driving America's highways. Still working. Still blending into ordinary life. And perhaps most dangerously of all, still growing more confident. Confidence is one of the most dangerous developments in the life cycle of a serial offender. The first crime often carries fear. The second carries caution. But each successful escape reinforces a powerful illusion. The illusion of superiority. The illusion that law enforcement is always one step behind. The illusion that consequences belong to other people. Keith Hunter Jesperson was beginning to embrace those illusions completely. As investigators focused on the wrong suspects in Oregon, he continued traveling thousands of miles behind the wheel of his truck. The highways stretched endlessly before him. Forests gave way to deserts. Mountains rose and disappeared beyond the horizon. State lines became little more than signs flashing past his windshield. The movement itself became part of his protection. A murder committed in one location could be separated from another by hundreds or even thousands of miles. Different police departments investigated different crimes. Different jurisdictions maintained different records. Communication systems were improving, but they remained far from perfect. In the modern world, databases can connect patterns with remarkable speed. In the early 1990s, such connections were far more difficult. Predators understood that. And Jesperson was learning to exploit it. As the years passed following Tonja Bennett's murder, women continued disappearing. Some vanished from truck stops. Some disappeared after accepting rides. Others simply seemed to fade into the enormous landscape of North America. At first glance, many of the cases appeared unrelated. Different locations. Different victims. Different circumstances. The similarities remained hidden beneath geography. This created one of the central frustrations of the investigation. No single detective possessed the entire picture. Each investigator saw only fragments. A body discovered in one state. A missing woman reported elsewhere. A suspicious encounter that seemed insignificant on its own. The puzzle existed, but the pieces were scattered across thousands of miles. Meanwhile, Jesperson's psychological needs were evolving. The murders themselves no longer seemed sufficient. Something else was emerging. The desire to be recognized. This craving distinguished him from many offenders. Most serial killers spend enormous energy concealing their crimes. Jesperson wanted concealment and recognition simultaneously. He wanted the freedom that came with anonymity. He wanted the satisfaction that came with notoriety. Those conflicting desires would shape the next stage of the case. As investigators revisited questions surrounding Tonja Bennett's murder, anonymous communications began attracting attention. Messages appeared. Confessions surfaced. Details emerged that seemed impossible for an outsider to know. The content suggested direct knowledge of the crime. More importantly, it suggested that authorities had not identified the correct killer. The implications were staggering. Imagine being a detective who spent years believing a case was solved. Then imagine receiving information that challenges everything. The victim's family had already endured loss. Now they faced uncertainty as well. If the wrong people had been convicted, then who was the real killer? Where was he? What else had he done? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Some investigators remained skeptical. Skepticism is healthy in criminal investigations. False confessions occur. Hoaxes occur. Attention seekers insert themselves into high-profile cases. Not every claim deserves credibility. Yet the communications connected to Jesperson contained a troubling quality. Specificity. Certain details aligned with evidence known only to investigators and the actual offender. That reality became increasingly difficult to ignore. As attention shifted toward the possibility of a different killer, another disturbing pattern emerged. Women were continuing to die. One homicide alone might be explained as an isolated act. Multiple homicides scattered across different states suggested something far more serious. Detectives began examining similarities. Victim profiles. Methods of killing. Geographic movement. Behavioral patterns. The process was painstaking. Every case required separate analysis. Every jurisdiction possessed its own records. Every investigation contained unique complications. Still, certain themes appeared repeatedly. Women living vulnerable lives. Encounters with a large male stranger. Evidence suggesting manual violence. Bodies discovered far from where victims were last seen. None of these observations alone identified a suspect. Together, they hinted at a frightening possibility. A serial predator was operating across state lines. At the center of this emerging pattern stood a profession that complicated everything. Long-haul trucking. The trucking industry itself is filled with hard-working individuals who spend enormous portions of their lives moving goods across countries. Millions of deliveries occur safely every year. Yet for investigators studying serial crime, trucking creates unique challenges. Drivers possess mobility. Drivers encounter strangers constantly. Drivers travel through countless jurisdictions. Drivers can appear in one state today and another tomorrow. When a violent offender gains access to such mobility, investigations become exponentially more difficult. Jesperson understood this reality, whether consciously or instinctively. The road became his camouflage. Truck stops became hunting grounds. Distance became an ally. And while investigators attempted to connect cases, he continued moving. One victim linked to his crimes was Cynthia Lynn Rose. Another was Laurie Ann Pentland. Then Patricia Skipple. Then Angela May Sobrise. Each murder created fresh devastation. Each investigation generated new leads. And each investigation encountered familiar obstacles. Limited witnesses. Fragmented evidence. Jurisdictional barriers. The killer's constant movement. For detectives, the experience often felt like chasing a shadow. A shadow that appeared briefly before vanishing again. The situation became even more complicated because many victims lived transient lifestyles. They moved frequently. They interacted with numerous people. They often lacked stable support networks. Missing persons reports did not always arrive immediately. Some disappearances took time to attract serious attention. That delay benefited the killer. Every day that passed widened the gap between crime and investigation. Every delay reduced opportunities for fresh evidence. Every delay strengthened the offender's advantage. As years passed, law enforcement agencies across multiple states wrestled with the same frustration. Someone was committing these crimes. Someone was moving between jurisdictions. Someone possessed enough confidence to continue offending. Yet that someone remained invisible. At least officially. Unofficially, Another story was unfolding. The letters. The confessions. The smiling faces. Jesperson's communications became increasingly important because they revealed a mind desperate for acknowledgement. The messages often displayed arrogance. They suggested contempt for investigators. They implied intellectual superiority. Most notably, they demonstrated a desire to control the narrative surrounding the murders. Control had always been central to his crimes. Now it extended beyond the victims. He wanted control over public perception. Control over media attention. Control over law enforcement's understanding of events. Every letter served multiple purposes. It fed his ego. It reinforced his identity. It reminded authorities that he existed. And it transformed homicide investigations into a psychological game. The killer was no longer merely committing crimes. He was commenting on them. Watching them. Participating in them. For investigators, this created a strange and unsettling dynamic. The offender wanted to be heard. But he did not want to be caught. He wanted attention. But only on his terms. This balancing act created opportunities and frustrations simultaneously. The communications provided clues. They also generated distractions. Separating truth from manipulation became increasingly important. As investigators examined the letters, behavioral experts began recognizing patterns common among narcissistic offenders. Jesperson appeared obsessed with significance. He wanted to feel powerful. He wanted to feel smarter than authorities. He wanted confirmation that people were paying attention. This psychological profile helped explain something that initially seemed incomprehensible. Why would a murderer complain about not receiving credit for a homicide? The answer lay in his ego. For Jesperson, murder was not only violence. It was validation. Every successful crime reinforced his sense of importance. Every investigation became proof of his ability to outsmart others. When someone else received credit for one of his murders, he viewed it as theft. Not theft of justice. Theft of recognition. That distinction exposed the depth of his narcissism. Yet despite growing suspicions, despite emerging patterns, despite increasingly compelling evidence, investigators still lacked the one thing they needed most. A direct path to the killer. They had theories. They had fragments. They had behavioral indicators. But they did not yet have certainty. And while authorities searched, Jesperson continued operating. The years between 1990 and 1995 became a period of accumulating tragedy. Victims continued to appear. Families continued grieving. Detectives continued comparing notes across state lines. The picture slowly sharpened. But it remained incomplete. Then came one of the most horrifying aspects of the entire case. The murder of Angela May Sobrise. The brutality described later by Jesperson revealed a killer growing increasingly confident and increasingly cruel. The violence suggested escalation. The kind of escalation investigators fear because it often indicates an offender who feels untouchable. By this stage, Jesperson had crossed countless moral boundaries. The murders themselves no longer appeared extraordinary to him. They had become part of a pattern. A routine. A cycle. Find a victim. Establish control. Kill. Dispose of evidence. Move on. The repetition stripped away whatever barriers may once have existed. And still, authorities remained one crucial step behind. Looking back, the investigation during these years resembles a maze filled with partial truths and dead ends. Wrongful convictions. Scattered evidence. Multiple jurisdictions. Anonymous confessions. Emerging victim connections. Each path seemed promising before reaching another obstacle. Yet beneath the frustration, progress was occurring. Slowly. Painfully. Almost invisibly. The pieces were moving toward alignment. The killer's need for attention was increasing. His confidence was becoming recklessness. His communications were creating trails. And somewhere beyond the horizon, an event was approaching that would change everything. Unlike many previous victims, the next woman would possess a direct connection to Keith Jesperson himself. That connection would prove impossible to hide forever. The years of shadows, letters, and unanswered questions were nearing their end. Investigators did not know it yet. The killer certainly did not expect it. But the breakthrough that had eluded law enforcement for so long was already beginning to take shape, and when it arrived, it would expose not only the murderer behind the smiling face, but the full extent of a nightmare that had been unfolding across America's highways for half a decade. For nearly 5 years, Keith Hunter Jesperson had managed to stay one step ahead. Bodies had been discovered. Investigations had been launched. Detectives across multiple states had searched for answers. Yet somehow the man responsible continued moving through the vast highway system of North America as though he were invisible. The roads protected him. Distance protected him. The mistakes made during the investigation of Tonja Bennett's murder protected him. Most importantly, his victims were often strangers whose lives intersected with his only briefly before tragedy struck. That final factor mattered more than anything else. A stranger disappears. A stranger is found dead. The killer vanishes. The connection ends there. But eventually, serial offenders make mistakes. Not always because they become less intelligent. Often because they become more confident. Confidence creates carelessness. Carelessness creates opportunities. And by early 1995, Keith Jesperson had become extraordinarily confident. The letters he sent to authorities reflected it. The confessions reflected it. The tone of superiority reflected it. He no longer viewed himself merely as a murderer. He viewed himself as the author of a story. A story in which investigators were supporting characters. A story in which he controlled the narrative. A story in which he always remained beyond reach. That illusion was about to collapse. The event that changed everything did not begin on a remote highway. It did not begin with a hitchhiker. It did not begin at a truck stop. It began inside a personal relationship. And that made all the difference. By 1995, Jesperson had become involved with a woman named Julie Winningham. Unlike many of his previous victims, Julie was not simply a stranger encountered during travel. She knew him. She interacted with him regularly. She existed within his personal world rather than briefly passing through it. That single difference would prove fatal for him. For years, Jesperson had carefully benefited from distance. Victims disappeared from his life permanently. No one remained close enough to observe patterns. No one remained close enough to notice contradictions. No one remained close enough to connect the dots. Julie represented a different situation. The relationship was troubled. Arguments occurred. Tensions developed. As with many violent offenders, Jesperson struggled with control. Control was not merely a preference for him. It was a psychological necessity. He wanted dominance over conversations. Dominance over relationships. Dominance over circumstances. When that dominance was challenged, anger followed. And anger had always been dangerous in his hands. The exact details of the confrontation between Jesperson and Julie remain known primarily through investigative findings and later admissions. What is clear is that during March 1995, a conflict escalated into deadly violence. Somewhere within what began as a personal dispute, the familiar pattern emerged once again. Control. Aggression. Violence. Death. Julie Winningham became another victim. But unlike the women whose lives had crossed his path briefly, Julie's death generated immediate complications. People knew she was connected to him. People knew they had spent time together. People knew he existed within her social circle. The protective shield of anonymity that had served him for years suddenly weakened. When investigators began examining Julie's disappearance and death, they quickly encountered a reality that previous investigations had lacked. A direct suspect. A man with an obvious connection to the victim. A man whose behavior raised questions. A man named Keith Jesperson. This was the turning point. The breakthrough investigators had unknowingly been approaching for years. Not because they suddenly discovered a hidden piece of forensic evidence. Not because a witness stepped forward after years of silence. Not because advanced technology solved the mystery. The breakthrough occurred because the killer abandoned the distance that had protected him. He moved too close to the crime. And once investigators focused their attention on him, the carefully constructed illusion began unraveling. Detectives examining the circumstances surrounding Julie's death started noticing inconsistencies. Questions multiplied. Answers failed to satisfy. The closer they looked, the more suspicious Jesperson became. For the first time in years, investigators were no longer chasing a shadow across multiple states. They were examining a specific individual. A real person. A real suspect. A man sitting directly in front of them. As pressure mounted, something else happened. The same ego that had driven Jesperson to write letters now became a liability. Many serial killers eventually face a fundamental problem. They spend years convincing themselves they are smarter than everyone else. The belief becomes part of their identity. And once that belief takes hold, humility disappears. Caution disappears. The ability to recognize danger disappears. Jesperson had spent years imagining himself as a criminal mastermind. He had outwitted investigators. He had manipulated media coverage. He had watched innocent people receive blame for one of his murders. From his perspective, those experiences confirmed his superiority. But reality was beginning to intrude. The investigation into Julie Winningham's death tightened around him. Evidence accumulated. Questions intensified. The walls were closing in. Then came the moment that transformed suspicion into certainty. Confronted by investigators and faced with mounting pressure, Jesperson began talking. And once he started talking, he struggled to stop. The confessions that followed shocked law enforcement. At first, investigators focused on Julie's murder. That alone would have justified serious criminal charges. But Jesperson's admissions extended far beyond a single homicide. He began discussing other victims. Other crimes. Other bodies. Other secrets. Suddenly detectives found themselves staring into something far larger than they had anticipated. The man sitting before them was not merely a murder suspect. He was a serial killer. The realization carried enormous implications. Every unresolved case needed review. Every previous confession required re-examination. Every anonymous letter acquired new significance. The smiling faces. The messages. The strange desire for recognition. Everything started making sense. Investigators soon discovered that Jesperson possessed knowledge impossible to dismiss. Specific details. Crime scene information. Facts known only to the perpetrator. The pieces that had remained scattered for years finally began connecting. One by one. Case by case. Victim by victim. The emerging picture was horrifying. A truck driver had spent years moving across multiple states while committing murders. A truck driver had inserted himself into investigations through anonymous communications. A truck driver had watched authorities struggle while secretly enjoying the attention. And now that truck driver was confessing. For investigators, the experience must have felt surreal. Years of unanswered questions suddenly collided with a flood of information. Yet even confessions presented challenges. Jesperson enjoyed talking about his crimes. That did not necessarily mean every statement was accurate. Like many narcissistic offenders, he often exaggerated. He embellished details. He sought attention. Separating fact from fiction became an investigation of its own. Authorities compared his statements against known evidence. Some claims matched perfectly. Others remained impossible to verify. Still, the overall pattern was undeniable. The killer behind the happy face letters had finally been identified. The nickname itself now acquired a face. A voice. A history. No longer an unknown phantom hiding behind anonymous messages. No longer an invisible predator traveling the highways. Keith Hunter Jesperson was real. And he was in custody. One of the most significant consequences of his arrest involved the Tonja Bennett case. For years, innocent people had carried responsibility for a crime they did not commit. Now investigators possessed the evidence needed to correct that injustice. Jesperson's admissions, combined with details only the actual killer could know, helped expose the wrongful convictions. The revelation was both relieving and devastating. Relieving because the truth was finally emerging. Devastating because it confirmed how badly the original investigation had gone wrong. The justice system had punished innocent people while the real killer continued murdering. There is no easy way to measure the consequences of such a mistake. How many lives might have been saved if the truth had been discovered earlier? How many victims would still be alive? The questions remain impossible to answer. What is clear is that the breakthrough arrived far too late for many women. By the time authorities fully understood who Jesperson was, multiple lives had already been lost. Yet the breakthrough still mattered. Without it, additional murders may have followed. Without it, the confessions might never have surfaced. Without it, families might never have received answers. As investigators dug deeper into Jesperson's history, they uncovered an unsettling combination of traits: narcissism, manipulation, violence, attention-seeking behavior, a profound need for control. The smiling faces that once seemed bizarre now appeared deeply symbolic. A smile normally represents warmth, friendship, happiness, trust. Jesperson had transformed that symbol into something sinister. A cheerful mask concealing cruelty. A childish drawing attached to horrific crimes. A signature designed to attract attention while mocking the suffering left behind. For detectives who had spent years searching for connections, the breakthrough felt like stepping into a room where the lights had finally been turned on. The shadows remained. The damage remained. The grief remained. But the shape of the truth was finally visible. The killer had a name. The pattern had a source. The mystery had an answer. Yet another challenge still awaited. Identifying a serial killer is one thing. Holding him accountable is another. Investigators now faced the enormous task of translating confessions, evidence, victim histories, and years of investigative work into a legal case capable of surviving courtroom scrutiny. Families would soon gather. Reporters would fill seats. Attorneys would prepare arguments. The public would finally see the man behind the headlines. And Keith Jesperson, after spending years desperate for recognition, was about to receive more attention than he had ever imagined. Only now, the audience would not be reading anonymous letters. The audience would be watching him answer for every life he had taken. The breakthrough had ended the hunt. The next chapter would determine whether justice could finally begin. The arrest of Keith Hunter Jesperson marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. 4 years, he had existed as a shadow moving across highways and state lines. He had controlled the pace of the story. He had chosen when to kill, when to travel, when to write letters, and when to reveal pieces of the truth. Investigators spent years reacting to his actions. Now, for the first time, that balance of power had shifted. The man who once watched investigations from a distance found himself sitting in interview rooms beneath fluorescent lights. The man who had mocked authorities through anonymous messages now faced direct questioning. The man who spent years avoiding accountability was about to enter a system built specifically to impose it. But bringing a serial killer to justice is rarely simple. An arrest creates certainty for investigators. A conviction requires proof. And proving years of murders spread across multiple states presented enormous challenges. As prosecutors began preparing their cases, detectives continued comparing Jesperson's statements against physical evidence and investigative records. Every confession had to be verified. Every detail had to be examined. Every claim had to withstand legal scrutiny. The process moved carefully, deliberately, because the stakes were enormous. This was not merely about establishing guilt. Authorities already believed they knew who the killer was. This was about ensuring that justice could survive appeals, challenges, and the passage of time. The courtroom would become the next battleground. And unlike the highways that had protected him for years, the courtroom offered nowhere to hide. For the families of the victims, the legal proceedings carried a complicated emotional weight. Many had waited years for answers. Some had spent birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries living with uncertainty. Some had watched investigations stall. Some had feared they would never learn what happened to their loved ones. Now the person responsible had been identified. Yet closure is rarely as straightforward as people imagine. The public often speaks about justice as though it arrives in a single moment. A verdict. A sentence. A prison door closing. Reality is more complicated. Nothing can restore a stolen life. Nothing can erase the final moments of fear experienced by a victim. Nothing can return lost years to grieving families. The courtroom can provide accountability. It cannot reverse tragedy. As legal proceedings moved forward, Keith Jesperson displayed many of the same characteristics investigators had already observed during interviews. He appeared comfortable discussing his crimes. At times, disturbingly comfortable. There was little indication of genuine remorse. Instead, observers frequently noted a man who seemed fascinated by his own notoriety. This behavior aligned with what investigators had seen for years. The letters. The confessions. The smiling faces. The desire for recognition. The courtroom represented another audience. And Jesperson appeared aware of it. Many serial killers spend trials attempting to minimize their actions. Others deny responsibility entirely. Jesperson often seemed more interested in maintaining control over the narrative. Control had always been central to his identity. Even after arrest, that need remained visible. Yet despite his efforts, the courtroom possessed something he could never truly control. Evidence. Evidence does not care about ego. It does not care about self-image. It does not care about manipulation. The facts remained. Victims had died. Investigations had connected him to the crimes. Confessions matched crime scene details. The picture was overwhelming. One by one, authorities built cases that documented the devastation left behind. The names of victims returned to the center of the conversation. Tonja Bennett. Cynthia Lynn Rose. Laurie Ann Pentland. Patricia Skipple. Angela May Sobrise. Suzanne Kjellenberg. And others whose stories remained incomplete. Each name represented a life interrupted. Each name represented a family forever changed. The legal proceedings forced the public to confront the human cost of Jesperson's actions. Behind every charge stood a real person. A daughter. A friend. A sister. A mother. Someone whose future had been erased. Perhaps one of the most significant developments involved the wrongful convictions connected to Tonja Bennett's murder. For years, innocent people had carried the consequences of a crime they did not commit. The revelation exposed painful weaknesses within the justice system. Wrongful convictions are among the most troubling outcomes any criminal investigation can produce. They create two victims simultaneously. An innocent person loses freedom. A guilty person remains free. In this case, the consequences were particularly severe because the real killer continued committing murders after the wrongful convictions occurred. As evidence against Jesperson solidified, those convictions were overturned. For the individuals involved, freedom arrived after years of injustice. Yet even freedom could not restore the time that had been taken. The case became a reminder that certainty must always be tested. That confessions alone are not enough. That investigations require constant vigilance against error. Inside courtrooms, prosecutors presented a portrait of a man who had used mobility, manipulation, and violence to avoid capture for years. They described a predator who targeted vulnerable women. A predator who traveled enormous distances. A predator who treated human lives as disposable. The image that emerged was chilling not because it was theatrical, but because it was methodical. The murders were not random explosions of anger. They formed a pattern, a system, a series of deliberate choices repeated across years. Defense strategies faced an uphill battle. The evidence was extensive. The confessions were powerful. The investigative work connected crimes spanning multiple jurisdictions. Perhaps most importantly, Jesperson himself had contributed significantly to the case against him. His own need for attention had created evidence. His own desire for recognition had produced confessions. His own arrogance had left a trail. The irony was impossible to ignore. The same ego that fueled his crimes helped secure his downfall. The smiling face he once drew to celebrate himself had become one of the symbols linking him to the murders. The attention he craved became the spotlight exposing him. The narrative he tried to control eventually escaped his control entirely. As proceedings continued, media coverage intensified. Newspapers revisited old cases. Television programs examined the investigation. Reporters attempted to understand how a truck driver had managed to evade detection for so long. Public fascination grew. Yet for families, the experience was often exhausting. Every news story reopened wounds. Every courtroom appearance revived memories. Every discussion of evidence forced loved ones to relive tragedy. Justice may require public accountability. Grief remains deeply personal. When sentencing finally arrived, the outcome reflected the extraordinary severity of the crimes. Keith Hunter Jesperson received multiple life sentences. The punishment ensured he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. No possibility existed that he would return to the highways he once traveled. No opportunity remained for future victims. The legal system had succeeded in achieving its most important objective: protection. The public would never again encounter him as a free man. For many observers, the sentence appeared appropriate. The scale of suffering justified the severity of the punishment. The years of violence, the multiple victims, the manipulation, the absence of genuine remorse. Everything pointed toward a sentence measured not in years but in lifetimes. Yet even after sentencing, mysteries lingered. One of the most troubling aspects of the Happy Face Killer case involves uncertainty surrounding the total number of victims. Authorities officially linked Jesperson to several murders. Jesperson himself made claims involving far larger numbers. At various times, he suggested totals far exceeding those investigators could verify. The discrepancy created a lingering question. How much of what he said was true? Serial killers frequently exaggerate. Some seek attention. Some attempt to appear more powerful. Some enjoy creating uncertainty. Investigators therefore approached many of Jesperson's claims with caution. Verification remained essential. Still, the possibility of additional victims could never be completely dismissed. For families of missing persons, that uncertainty remains deeply painful. Every unidentified victim raises questions. Every unsolved homicide creates possibilities. Every unconfirmed confession leaves investigators searching for answers. Even after conviction, the work continued. Evidence required review. Cold cases required comparison. Potential victim identifications required examination. The story was legally concluded, but investigative questions remained alive. Meanwhile, Jesperson entered prison carrying the notoriety he had spent years pursuing. His name appeared in books. Documentaries examined his crimes. Researchers studied his psychology. Journalists analyzed his letters. In some ways, he achieved the recognition he always wanted. But the reality differed dramatically from the fantasy. Recognition arrived handcuffed. Recognition arrived through prison walls. Recognition arrived attached permanently to the suffering he caused. The powerful predator who once traveled freely across North America now existed within a controlled environment where every movement was restricted. The contrast was striking. For years he controlled highways. Now he controlled nothing. For years he dictated the pace of events. Now others dictated it for him. For years he believed himself untouchable. Now he faced the consequences of being found. The courtroom battles eventually ended. The verdicts remained. The sentences remained. The prison gates remained closed. Justice, imperfect though it may be, had finally caught up with the man behind the smiling face. Yet as the legal chapter drew to a close, a deeper question remained. How should society remember a case like this? As the story of a serial killer? As the story of investigative failures and successes? As the story of victims whose lives were stolen? The answer lies somewhere within all of those perspectives. Because the final chapter of this case is not really about the killer at all. It is about what remains after the headlines fade. The families. The lessons. The scars. And the difficult truths left behind when a predator spends years hiding in plain sight. Years have passed since Keith Hunter Jesperson was led away in handcuffs and sentenced to spend the remainder of his life behind prison walls. The highways he once traveled continue to stretch across North America exactly as they did before. Trucks still move through the night. Drivers still stop at roadside diners. Rain still falls across Oregon forests. Wind still sweeps through the Columbia River Gorge. To an ordinary traveler, the landscape appears unchanged. Yet for the families connected to the Happy Face killer case, those roads will never feel entirely ordinary again. Some places become permanently linked to memory. A highway exit. A truck stop. A stretch of forest. A roadside embankment. Locations that mean nothing to strangers can carry unbearable weight for those who know what happened there. Long after court proceedings end, long after newspaper headlines fade, grief remains. It settles into everyday life in quiet and often invisible ways. The public usually experiences true crime stories through dramatic moments. The discovery of a body. The arrest of a suspect. The announcement of a verdict. But the people closest to the victims experience something very different. Their story continues after the cameras leave. It continues on birthdays. It continues during holidays. It continues when an old photograph unexpectedly falls from a drawer or when a familiar song suddenly brings back memories that had been resting quietly beneath the surface. For them, there is no final episode. There is no ending that neatly resolves everything. There is only the difficult task of carrying loss forward into the future. The victims in this case were often described through the lens of vulnerability. Some struggled financially. Some moved frequently. Some lived on the margins of society. Some depended on strangers more than most people ever would. Yet reducing them to those circumstances risks repeating a mistake society often makes. Human beings are more than their hardships. They are more than the worst moment of their lives. They are more than the circumstances surrounding their deaths. Tonja Bennett was not simply a homicide victim. She was a person with memories, relationships, hopes, fears, and dreams. The same is true for Cynthia Lynn Rose. The same is true for Laurie Ann Pentland, Patricia Skipple, Angela Mesa Bryce, Suzanne Kjellenberg, and every other woman whose life intersected with Keith Jesperson's violence. One of the most important lessons from this case is the danger of invisibility. Serial predators frequently target individuals they believe will not receive immediate attention. People living unstable lives. People without strong support networks. People whom society often overlooks. In many ways, the crimes committed by Jesperson exposed uncomfortable truths that extend far beyond one killer. They revealed how easily vulnerable people can disappear without generating immediate public concern. They revealed how gaps in communication can allow dangerous offenders to operate across large geographic areas. They revealed how assumptions inside investigations can sometimes lead authorities away from the truth rather than toward it. Perhaps nowhere is this lesson more evident than in the wrongful convictions connected to the murder of Tonja Bennett. Few aspects of the case remain as troubling. 2 innocent people lost years of their lives while the actual killer remained free. During that period, additional women died. The consequences continue to echo decades later. The case became a powerful reminder that justice is not simply about reaching conclusions. Justice requires reaching the correct conclusions. A confession alone is not enough. Certainty alone is not enough. Investigators must continually challenge assumptions because once a mistake enters an investigation, it can grow larger with every step that follows. Modern law enforcement agencies often study cases like this precisely because of those failures. Improvements in forensic science, information sharing, offender profiling, and interstate cooperation emerged partly from lessons learned through investigations that exposed weaknesses in older systems. While no system can ever eliminate human error completely, each tragedy offers opportunities to prevent future tragedies. Yet perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Happy Face Killer case is the question that still lingers unanswered. How many victims were there really? Official investigations confirmed several murders. Jesperson himself claimed far larger numbers. Some experts dismiss those claims as exaggerations driven by ego. Others remain cautious, unwilling to ignore the possibility that additional victims may exist. The uncertainty creates an uncomfortable reality. Somewhere in archives, missing person reports remain unsolved. Somewhere in evidence rooms, unidentified remains await names. Somewhere families continue searching for answers that may never arrive. For them, the story remains unfinished. Time does not necessarily heal such wounds. Sometimes it simply teaches people how to live alongside them. Another layer of the case emerged years later through an unexpected voice. Not a detective. Not a journalist. Not a prosecutor. The voice belonged to Jesperson's daughter, Melissa G. Moore. Her experience introduced an entirely different perspective into the public conversation. Society often focuses on victims and offenders, but the families of offenders carry burdens of their own. They did not commit the crimes. Yet they must live with the knowledge of what someone they loved has done. Imagine discovering that your father is one of the most notorious serial killers in modern American history. Imagine revisiting childhood memories through that lens. Every ordinary moment suddenly becomes complicated. Every memory invites new questions. Was there a warning sign? Was there something hidden beneath the surface? Could anyone have known? These questions rarely have satisfying answers. The crimes committed by one individual create shockwaves that travel through generations. Children inherit consequences they never chose. Families become associated with acts they never committed. The damage extends far beyond crime scenes and courtrooms. Cases like this force us to confront an uncomfortable truth about evil. Most people want monsters to look like monsters. We want obvious warning signs. We want visible indicators that allow us to identify danger instantly. Reality rarely works that way. Keith Jesperson was not hiding in abandoned buildings or living entirely outside society. He held a job. He interacted with co-workers. He maintained relationships. He moved through ordinary environments. This is one reason serial killer cases remain so disturbing. They challenge assumptions about how danger appears. The threat is not always obvious. Sometimes it sits across a table. Sometimes it shares a conversation. Sometimes it smiles. Yet focusing solely on the killer ultimately misses the most important lesson. True crime stories often risk creating accidental celebrities out of murderers. Nicknames become famous. Faces become recognizable. Books and documentaries explore every detail of their lives. Meanwhile, victims risk fading into the background. That imbalance deserves correction. The legacy of this case should not belong primarily to the man who signed letters with smiling faces. It should belong to the people whose futures were stolen. It should belong to the families who endured years of uncertainty. It should belong to investigators who continued searching despite mistakes and setbacks. It should belong to the lessons learned through pain and failure. Because at its core, this story is not about a serial killer seeking attention. It is about human lives interrupted by violence. It is about mothers who never saw daughters come home. It is about friends waiting for phone calls that never arrived. It is about families forced to rebuild themselves after unimaginable loss. Decades later, the prison walls surrounding Keith Jesperson remain standing. The cells close each night. The routines continue. The world outside moves forward. New generations grow up having never heard his name. New crimes dominate headlines. New investigations demand attention. Time continues its relentless march. Yet memory has a way of resisting time. Somewhere a family photograph still sits on a shelf. Somewhere a loved one still wonders what life might have looked like if a certain night had unfolded differently. Somewhere a victim's name is spoken aloud by people determined not to let it disappear. And perhaps that is where this story truly ends. Not with the killer. Not with the courtroom. Not with the sentence. It ends with remembrance. Because every victim deserved a future that was never granted. Every victim deserved the chance to grow older, to create new memories, to experience ordinary moments that most of us take for granted. Those futures were stolen. Nothing can change that. But memory offers something important. It refuses to allow the victims to become invisible. Long after the smiling face has lost its power to shock, long after the headlines have faded into history, the names remain. And as long as those names are remembered, the people behind them remain more than victims. They remain human beings whose stories mattered, whose lives mattered, and whose absence continues to remind us why justice, vigilance, and compassion must never be taken for granted. There is a moment that arrives at the end of every true crime story when the facts have all been laid out. The victims have been named. The crimes have been examined. The investigation has been reconstructed. The killer has been identified. The sentence has been delivered. On paper, the story appears complete. Yet some cases leave behind questions that extend far beyond police reports and courtroom transcripts. The story of Keith Hunter Jesperson is one of those cases. Because when we strip away the headlines, the infamous nickname, the television adaptations, the books, and the endless fascination surrounding serial killers, we are left with something much simpler and much more unsettling. We are left with a human being who repeatedly chose to destroy other human beings. That is the truth at the center of this case. Not mystery. Not mythology. Choice. Every murder required a decision. Every act of violence required a decision. Every attempt to conceal evidence required a decision. Every letter sent to the media required a decision. At multiple points across multiple years, Keith Jesperson could have stopped. He never did. That reality matters because discussions about serial killers often drift toward explanations. People want to understand how someone becomes capable of such brutality. They examine childhood experiences, family dynamics, psychological factors, social influences. These questions are important. Understanding violence can help prevent future violence. But explanation should never become excuse. Many people experience difficult childhoods without becoming murderers. Many people experience rejection, anger, loneliness, or abuse without taking another person's life. The factors that shape an individual are important, but they do not erase responsibility. Jesperson ultimately remained responsible for every choice he made. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of this case is how ordinary parts of it appear on the surface. A truck driver traveling long distances is not unusual. A man stopping at restaurants, fuel stations, and roadside motels is not unusual. A person carrying on conversations with strangers is not unusual. Nothing about many of the circumstances surrounding the crimes immediately announces danger. That is precisely why the case remains so unsettling decades later. It reminds us that evil does not always arrive wearing a recognizable face. Sometimes it arrives looking ordinary. Sometimes it blends seamlessly into everyday life. This realization creates discomfort because human beings naturally seek certainty. We want clear distinctions between safety and danger. We want warning signs that cannot be missed. We want reassurance that predators are easily identified. Cases like this challenge those assumptions. They force us to acknowledge that the world is often more complicated than we would prefer. Yet fear is not the lesson we should take from this story. Awareness is. There is an important difference. Fear encourages paralysis. Awareness encourages understanding. Awareness encourages communities to pay attention to vulnerable people. Awareness encourages investigators to question assumptions. Awareness encourages systems to improve communication across jurisdictions. Awareness encourages society to recognize the humanity of individuals who might otherwise be overlooked. In many ways, the victims themselves represent the most important lesson of all. Throughout history, serial offenders have repeatedly targeted people living on the margins of society. Individuals experiencing homelessness, sex workers, runaways, hitchhikers, people struggling with addiction, people living unstable lives. Predators often assume these victims will receive less attention from authorities and less sympathy from the public. The assumption is cruel. It is also dangerous. Every human life carries equal value. Every victim deserves the same commitment to justice. Every disappearance deserves investigation. Every family deserves answers. Cases like the Happy Face Killer murders remind us what can happen when vulnerable populations become invisible. The victims in this story were not statistics. They were individuals. They laughed. They worried. They loved people and were loved in return. They imagined futures for themselves. They carried memories from childhood. They had favorite songs, favorite foods, favorite places. They existed as complete human beings long before they became names in criminal investigations. One of the greatest responsibilities of true crime storytelling is ensuring that those identities are not lost beneath the weight of the killer's notoriety. History often remembers offenders more easily than victims. Serial killers receive documentaries. Their photographs circulate endlessly. Their words are analyzed. Their motivations are debated. Meanwhile, victims risk becoming brief paragraphs in someone else's story. That imbalance deserves constant correction. The real story of this case is not that a serial killer sought attention through smiling faces drawn at the bottom of letters. The real story is that multiple women lost their lives and multiple families lost people they loved. Everything else is secondary. Another lasting lesson emerges from the wrongful convictions associated with Tonja Bennett's murder. Justice systems are created by human beings. Human beings make mistakes. The possibility of error must never be ignored simply because a conclusion feels convincing. Investigators believed they had solved the crime. Prosecutors believed they had the right people. Courts accepted the outcome. Yet the truth remained hidden. This lesson extends beyond a single case. The pursuit of justice requires humility. It requires constant re-evaluation. It requires a willingness to acknowledge mistakes when they occur. Without those qualities, the risk of future injustice remains. The wrongful convictions also raise a haunting question that can never be answered with certainty. If the real killer had been identified sooner, how many lives might have been saved? The question lingers because it touches the deepest tragedy within the case. Every delay carried consequences. Every mistaken assumption created opportunities for additional violence. The answer remains unknowable, but the possibility itself serves as a reminder of how important accuracy is within criminal investigations. There is another dimension to this story that deserves attention. The impact of violence extends far beyond the moment violence occurs. Society often imagines crime as an event, something that happens and then ends. In reality, major crimes behave more like earthquakes. The initial event is devastating, but the aftershocks continue for years. Families experience them. Investigators experience them. Witnesses experience them. Even generations that follow can experience them. Children grow up without parents. Parents grow old without children. Brothers and sisters carry unanswered questions into the future. Entire family histories change direction because of a single act of violence. The effects ripple outward in ways that statistics can never fully capture. This is why remembrance matters. Not because remembrance changes the past. It cannot. The victims do not return. The losses remain permanent. Remembrance matters because it affirms value. It declares that a person's life mattered enough to be remembered. It refuses to allow violence to erase identity. It pushes back against the tendency to reduce victims to case numbers and headlines. In the years since Jesperson's conviction, countless people have learned about the happy face killer through documentaries, podcasts, articles, and television programs. Many encounter the story because they are curious about criminal psychology. Others are interested in investigations. Some are fascinated by the mystery itself. Those interests are understandable. But if there is one thing worth carrying away from this case, it is not fascination with the killer. It is empathy for those affected by him. Empathy for the victims. Empathy for the families. Empathy for the innocent people caught in the aftermath of violence. Empathy for the investigators who spent years chasing answers. Empathy reminds us that true crime is not entertainment for the people who lived through it. For them, it is reality. As we reach the end of this story, the image that remains is not a prison cell. It is not a courtroom. It is not a newspaper headline featuring a smiling face. Instead, imagine a collection of ordinary moments that never had the chance to happen. Birthdays that were never celebrated. Conversations that were never completed. Friendships that never had the opportunity to deepen. Families that never became whole again. Futures that vanished before they could unfold. Those missing moments represent the true cost of the crimes. They are invisible, yet they are everywhere within this story. And perhaps that is the final reason these cases continue to matter. They remind us how fragile life can be. They remind us not to take ordinary moments for granted. They remind us that every person we pass on a street, every stranger we encounter, every loved one we speak to carries a life as complex and valuable as our own. The story of Keith Hunter Jesperson ends where all stories about violence should ultimately end, not with admiration for the offender, not with fascination for the darkness, but with recognition of the human lives that deserved better. Long after the nickname has faded from public memory, long after the details of the investigation become historical records, that truth will remain. The victims deserved to grow old. They deserved to continue writing their own stories. They deserved futures. Remembering that simple fact may be the closest thing to justice that history can offer once everything else has already been taken away.